Tonight's moderator is Christine Hemmerich. Thank you for coming here. She's also a fiction writer and a professor of English at the Catholic University of Brussels. Mrs. Hemmerich has built an own very impressive literary oeuvre, revealing also an interesting and surprising perspective on human emotions. She's also well known for the biography of her late husband, the poet Herman de Koning, which I particularly really loved. She will introduce Mrs. Holmes, and then Mrs. Holmes will have a lecture, and after that she will be interviewed by Mrs. Hemmerich. And then after that the audience has the possibility to ask some questions. I will be back later on this evening for more information about our upcoming lectures. Thank you very much, and I hope you will enjoy the evening.
Good evening. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you tonight the American author A.M. Holmes. A.M. Holmes is here with us as a guest of the John Adams Institute. All of us are guests of the John Adams Institute. And let me say thank you for their hospitality. But of course, A.M. Holmes' visit to Amsterdam is being hosted by the Bezige Bij, who published her work in translation. As it happened, A.M. Holmes' schedule for her 2-day visit was also forwarded to me. And so I know that this morning at 6:10 a.m. she left Dublin Airport on flight EI 602. At 9:30 a.m. she was checked into the hotel and started giving interviews to 5 different newspapers. Tomorrow will be packed in a similar fashion with meetings and interviews, and then mercifully she will be released on Thursday morning. I imagine that A.M. Holmes looked in her diary this morning and said to herself, if it's Tuesday, it must be Amsterdam. I must confess that when reading her schedule, I felt quite a bit guilty. My God, I thought, all this poor woman will want at 8 p.m. tonight is put her feet up and relax. And yet, I'll be torturing her with yet more questions about her work and her life, and maybe even about the domestic and foreign policies of her country. Maybe I'll even ask her what she thinks of the invasion of Iraq and Guantanamo Bay, and does Hillary Clinton stand a chance of ever becoming the first woman president of the United States? I confess that I also sensed a tiny pang of envy. Not a big, massive explosion, but all the same it was there, very discreet but unmistakable. And I was reminded of what my father used to say about the American GIs who came to Europe to liberate us from the Nazis. Oversexed, overpaid, and over here. But what I mostly felt was joy. For in a final confession, I can out myself as a fan of A.M. Holmes' work. I am a very critical reader and also a fairly jaded reader, but from the very first sentences I read, I loved her work, her style, her vision. So I am actually overjoyed that there should be so much interest in her work, and I hope A.M. Holmes has some energy left for yet another reading and interview here with us tonight. Now, when I tell you that I love her work, you will want to know why. The answer is quite simple and straightforward. A.M. Holmes writes extremely well. As soon as you enter a story or a novel of hers, you are struck by a distinct voice, which it is extremely hard to resist. It is a voice which demands you listen to it. There is the voice, and there is also her style. While reading The End of Alice, I was inevitably reminded of Nabokov's Lolita. That is also quite obviously the point. There are many explicit references, but maybe more importantly, her style is also reminiscent of that of the great master of English prose. and the brilliance of her style might even exceed that of Nabokov's. A.M. Holmes has made a name and reputation for herself as a short story writer. She has a great gift for presenting a complex situation in a limited number of pages. A short story writer has to leave out all clutter. You stick to what is essential, no commentary or interpretation. You opt for suggestion. A lot is being implied rather than made explicit. Now, it is always tricky when the short story writer switches to a different genre, a much longer genre, the novel. But the wonderful thing is that she pulls it off, and still there is no clutter, no irritating commentary. That is also true of her latest novel, This Book Will Save Your Life. And I was going to add that the book can be read in Dutch, but not yet in English, but that's not quite true. I was going to say that the Bezige Bij is yet again outrunning all their American colleagues, but this time an American edition is available, though not yet a European English edition, so Europeans can only read it in Dutch as yet. I have mentioned her voice, her style, but then there is her vision of society and of human behavior. There are very few normal people in her work, but then of course we should ask ourselves the question, what does it mean to be normal? Are there any normal people around? Judging from her work, the suburbs of the United States are certainly not the place to look for normalcy. It would be interesting if we could organize a little experiment and get the fierce Rita Verdonk to graciously offer A.M. Holmes a residence permit for a stay in Amsterdam. I would be very curious to see what A.M. Holmes would make of the Dutch and Dutch society. And of course, when she's cleared a job here, she'd be very welcome in my country, Belgium, home of surrealist painting, where surely the natives would be an endless source of inspiration. I haven't said a single word yet about A.M. Holmes herself. I have an inkling A.M. Holmes is fairly reluctant to share details of her biography with her readers. This is what it says under biography on her official website. A.M. Holmes is the author of the novels This Book Will Save Your Life, Music for Torching the End of Alice, In a Country of Mothers, and Jack, as well as the short story collections Things You Should Know, The Safety of Subjects, that's a nice slip, and a travel memoir, Los Angeles, People, Places, and the Castle on the Hill. Her work has been translated into 12 languages and appears frequently in Art Forum, Harper's, etc., etc. She has been the recipient of numerous awards, including fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library, along with the Benjamin Franklin Award and the Deutsche Jugendliteraturpreis. Born in Washington, D.C., she now lives in New York City. I must say I am especially fond of the last sentence. Born in Washington, D.C., she now lives in New York City, full stop. Personally, I interpret that sentence as meaning my life doesn't matter. It's not about me, incidental me, but about my work. Read it, discuss it, but don't ask questions about my life. I was born and I live somewhere. We all have to. At the same time, A.M. Holmes has published some autobiographical texts, which can be downloaded from the net, by the way, in which readers learn a great deal about her background and childhood. Now, having read these articles, I could tell you quite a bit more, but I am reluctant to do so. Although they have been published, And although they are in the public domain, I have a feeling that A.M. Holmes fiercely guards her private life. She will share some details with us, but on her terms, on paper. She is a writer, not a gossip. At least that is what I think. I have only read A.M. Holmes. I know her work, but not her. But enough from me. A.M. Holmes will now give her reading, and she will also read from This Book Will Save Your Life. The idea is for her to round off around 8:45. They're quite strict here about their schedule. Then there's going to be an interview till about 9:30, and when finally you, the audience, will have an opportunity to ask questions. But let's listen now to A.M. Holmes.
Thank you. That was such an incredibly wonderful introduction. Actually, I now do feel that you know me, and I'm shy and embarrassed, and I think most of that was actually true. I absolutely relate on the page and not in person. So I'm looking forward to our interview after I read. We'll just see. I very much want to thank the John Adams for having me. I actually found out about this reading on the web. No one had told me about it, and I was looking at reviews of the book, and all of a sudden it said, A.M. Holmes, John Adams Institute. I thought, what is that? And it said I would be reading here, and I knew nothing about it. And I'm also reading tonight in New York City, which is going to be interesting, I think. So I'm very happy to be here, and I wanted to thank Robert Amerland, who I have known for years, and just wanted to thank him for his support. What I will tell you about this book before I read it a little bit to you is it is a novel. It's the first novel I've written in 7 years. It's set in Los Angeles, and I knew that I very much wanted to write a novel set in Los Angeles. I think of my work as being kind of horribly American, really, which I'm happy to talk about later also. But I think of Los Angeles right now as being kind of the most American city in America. It is a place where the American dream thrives, and people still come really from all over the world to kind of make it there, whatever that means, whether it's, a guy coming from Mexico to be a gardener or a young person coming from Iowa to be a movie star. It still is a kind of a mecca, and it's still kind of the Wild West in a way. And that interested me, and I also think it's a very surrealistic place, because one of the things that happens in Los Angeles is you start asking people about their lives there, and they say they love it because of the weather. My experience of the weather in Los Angeles is there are floods and fires and earthquakes and things that are kind of only really otherwise written about in the Bible. And that is part of daily life there. But for some reason, the people who live there insist that the weather and the quality of life is what keeps them there. And I can never decide if the people are just eternally optimistic or stupid. So that was part of the impetus for this novel. And another part of it was that I also was interested in the fact that in Los Angeles, there is great tolerance for eccentricity, and there is great tolerance for transformation, so that a person can be someone like John Peters, who was a hairdresser to the stars, but a hairdresser nonetheless, one day, and then owned a movie studio the next. And there is that sense that a person can kind of become something different. And I very much wanted to write about a man who was trying to change his life and sort of accept responsibility for who he had become and trying to figure out who he would be next. So that was part of that decision too. And when we're done, I'm happy to answer the well thought out questions, as well as any that just occur to you randomly about Los Angeles or America or the government or the politics of things in America, which admittedly are weird. So that said, what I will read to you is a sort of a compressed version, edited down, of the first part of the book. So you actually now have to buy the book and read the real version yourself. And I will read it in English because I couldn't possibly read it in anything else, which is why I'm horribly American, which is why I have to apologize ahead of time. This book will save your life. He stands at the glass looking out. The city spreads below him, blanketed in foggy slumber, low pressure. Clouds roll over the hills, seeping out of cracks and crevices, as if the geography itself is sending smoke signals. Below him, far down the hill, a woman swims, her long brown hair floating through the water. Her suit is a beautiful bright red dot, a rare tropical bird in a pool of unnatural blue. Every morning she swims, crawls like an Olympian. She takes comfort in her swimming, in her determination, her rhythm and routine, in the fact that she is awake when he is awake. There is urgency in her stroke. She cannot not swim. She is his confidant, his muse, his mermaid. He is at the glass. Usually he is not here, not now. Usually he gets up, goes on his machine. He runs while she swims. He runs watching the electronic ticker tape go by, trading from a keyboard strapped to the treadmill, typing as he trots, placing his bets, adjusting his positions, going long and short, riding an invisible electronic wave. Usually usually, everything today is not the same, and yet it is exactly the same, and it can never be the same again. He stands at the glass. The mechanical sounds of the house catch him off guard. Ice tumbles into the freezer bin. The coffee pot begins to fill with water. Air whooshes out of the vent, billowing up the leg of his pants. He shudders. "Hello?" he calls. "Anybody home?" Usually he doesn't hear it. He hears nothing, feels nothing. He makes sure of that. He wakes up, puts on his noise-canceling headset, goes to the glass, looks at the woman swimming, and gets on his machine. He lives in a vacuum of silence, life canceled. After years of making sure that he is left alone, he's suddenly afraid to be alone, afraid not to hear, not to feel, not to notice. He presses his ear to the glass. Music. Up the hill, men are installing a lawn where there would otherwise be nothing. They have built a bulkhead, a frame for the grass, and are rolling out sod. They're making a small putting green, one hole. He stands at the point of the house where two thick panes of glass meet, a sharp corner jutting out over the hill like the prow of a ship. He stands, captain, lord, master, prisoner of his own making. Ahead in the distance, there's something orange and smoky. It takes him a moment to decide. Brush fire or simply dawn in Los Angeles? Yesterday seems realer than real, a dream, an accident, like some sort of seizure or suspension. Did something happen? There's a depression in the earth, a large, soft, circular indentation that he doesn't remember from the day before. He looks at it, mentally measuring. 8 feet in diameter by about 50 feet from the house. Where did it come from? How long has it been there? How would he describe it? Like the mark made by the back of an enormous ladle pressed into the earth. Do things like that even happen overnight? On the floor of the living room, on the glassed coffee table near the sofa, in an otherwise ordered world, there is debris, little bits of things, plastic nubbins, a piece of tubing, a ripped paper, a single piece of bloody gauze. Proof. He's thinking about the pain. It started as a knotty cramp in his back, a strange tightening from his gut up into his chest. He wondered if it was the lentil soup he'd had for lunch. He waited, he took an antacid. It got worse, spreading, searing knife-like down his leg, pressing up into his jaw, a rock-hard ache, a long, sharp knitting needle poking into his arm, pain trickling into his fingers. Were they numb? His whole body splitting like an axe cutting through fresh wood, a hard, violent spasm that could crack a man in two. He didn't think to call anyone, didn't know who to call, what exactly to say. Where was the pain? It was everywhere, staggering, sweaty, dizzy-making. He was standing at the glass, overcome by pain, collapsing, every nerve, every fiber in his body folding in on itself as though starved. He was standing at the glass in pain, and the strangest thing was, he didn't know where it hurt. He couldn't feel anything. He began to cry. He cried without making a sound, and when he realized he was crying, the very fact of crying, or the fear of it, told him that something was very wrong. And he cried harder. Was this it? Was this how it happens? Was there something before this, something he should have noticed, a warning? Or was this the warning? Either this was the warning or this was it. He dialed 911. Police, fire, ambulance. Doctor, he said. Police, fire, ambulance. Rescue, he said. Police, fire, ambulance. It was a recording. Ambulance, he said. One moment, please. He waited to be connected, and in the moment of silence, the pain left. The pain passed, and he began to think it was a nightmare, a daydream, a lousy lunch gone down wrong. Just as he was about to hang up, a woman came on the line. What is the emergency? She asked, and the pain returned, reminding him. Pain, he said, incredible pain. Where is the pain? I think this is it, he said. Sir, where are you feeling the pain? Everywhere. Have you sustained an injury, a gunshot wound, fall, snakebite, bow, or arrow? No, he said. I'm home. I've been home all day. It's seeping through me. It's like I'm soaking in pain. How long have you been in pain, sir? I don't know. Minutes, hours, days? Hours at least, but it could be days or years. He had no idea. On a scale of 1 to 10, sir, how much pain are you in? 10. How would you describe the pain? Sharp, throbbing, stabbing, dull? Yes, he said. Which of those best describes how you're feeling right now? All of them. Do you have a history of heart attack, stroke, or seizure? No, he said. How old are you, sir? 55. Are you home alone? Inexplicably, this question terrified him. I'm divorced, he said. Is there anyone there with you? No. Have you ever had this pain before? I never noticed it until today. He was becoming increasingly anxious. It felt like a test, too many questions. Was she going to send help or just talk to him all night? Sir, are you short of breath? The idea of a heart attack or stroke hadn't exactly occurred to him. It had occurred to him that this was it, but not that he was having a heart attack. Sir, can you cough for me? Can you take a deep breath and give me a couple of good, strong coughs? He did the best he could. Can you confirm for me your name and address? Oh, you can call me Rick, he said. Is that your real name? What are you getting at? Do you own your own home? Yes. Is there any other name that your phone or property might be listed under? Richard, he said. Thank you, Mr. Novak, the operator said. How do you know who I am? Our system is enhanced. Help is on the way, and as part of a pilot program which helps train crisis counselor, I can transfer you to a counselor who will remain on the line until help arrives. Are you trying to sell me something? No, sir, there's no additional charge. It's a service you qualify for because you fit the profile. The profile? You're in the right zip code with a life-threatening crisis. With your permission, I'm going to transfer you to a counselor. Her name is Patty. Is she real or automatic? She's right here. One moment. Hi, Richard. My name is Patty. Hi, Patty, he says. Is it like a chat line? What are you doing, Richard? He doesn't know how to answer that. She makes it sound like he's faking. Richard? I'm dying. What are you dying from? Pain, a rupture, an explosion, a slow, tortured death. Where in your body is the pain, Richard? Can you close your eyes and go into it? There are men who keel over at lunch, who are having lunch at the most wonderful, delicious, expensive restaurant in town, and boom, they fall over and die. He could be one of those. He could go just like that, out like a light, his aunt used to say. Richard, what was the last movie you saw? This is one of those only in LA questions where even as you die, people are talking to you about the movies. I have no idea. He struggled to think back. He remembered seeing Bonnie and Clyde at the Wellfleet, Massachusetts drive-in about 1 million years ago. Do you have any hobbies, Patty asked? Do you like to play golf? I like to swim, he said, surprising himself. Where do you swim? Do you have a pool? No. When did you last go swimming? About 5 years ago. At a hotel in Miami, I took a woman there for a long weekend. It ended badly. You know, I think I'd rather not talk right now. It's very distracting to try to have a conversation. "What would you rather do, Richard?" "Patty," he said, "where are you from?" "Minnesota." "I thought so. You sound like someone from Minnesota or Modesto." He was sitting on the sofa staring at the glass. "That's okay, Patty. You don't have to keep talking to me. I'd like to just be quiet so I can concentrate." "Are you able to sit, stand, or walk?" Patty asked. "I'm in pain," he repeated, as though that meant something. "They'll be there soon." Richard wondered if he had enough cash to pay them, and then he wondered where the thought came from. He didn't have to pay them. He'd already paid them. That's what taxes were for. When he was married and living in New York, he once ordered Chinese food and was still on the phone with the restaurant when the order arrived. They used to joke that the restaurant had a satellite kitchen in the building's basement. He and his wife always kept cash in the apartment to pay them. They were always paying someone, the delivery men, the doormen, the handymen. "Are you there?" Patty asked. Richard heard sirens in the distance, the rumble of engines, trucks climbing the hill, the siren grinding to a stop outside his house. He could see the reflection of the red flashing light in the glass. He knew they were out there. There was a knock at the door. He lay on the sofa thinking he should get up. "Richard," Patty said, "the firemen are at the door. Can you let them in?" "I don't know," he said, scared, like all of a sudden this was a bad idea, like he never should have called. He watched. He saw them walking around the house, coming down the hill, their flashlights bouncing, their heavy coats like branded elephant skins with iridescent numbers glowing. He heard their radio squawking. They announced his name over a megaphone in such a way that compelled him to surrender. "Richard Novak, can you hear me? Can you open the door?" "Is there a key hidden somewhere?" Patty asked. "The garage is open," Richard said. "Good luck," Patty said, hanging up. They came in, carrying bags, their coats smelling like fire. "I'm on the sofa," he said. "I'm crying." There was no fire. They were surrounding him, kneeling in front of him, talking to him. "We're going to take your pressure, give you a little bit of oxygen." He nodded. "Are you in pain right now?" "I don't know," he said, speaking into the plastic mask. His voice sounded muffled and distant. "I don't remember anything." A police officer arrived, and he wondered, were they going to arrest him for making a crank call, crying wolf, wasting public services? "Are you home alone?" the cop asked. He nodded again. He wondered why they were so obsessed about who was home. The house was filling with people calling him by name, talking to him very loudly. The paramedics arrived and opened cases, hard cases like tackle trays. They set up the machine he'd seen on TV, the defibrillator. He prayed they weren't going to use it on him. He was conscious, wasn't he? On TV, the medics call out, "All clear," and stand back, and then they shock the hell out of the person. The machine was sitting there ready, green light, go. "Hey, that's a nice de Kooning," one of the paramedics said. They took off his shirt and put leads on his chest, swapped the oxygen mask for tubes that went up his nose. "And I really like your Rothko. I think I saw that one at Mocha." "It was on loan," Richard said. "Oh yeah," one of the firemen said. "I thought that looked familiar. That's by the guy they made that movie about, Ed Harris." The paramedic shook his head. "No, Ed Harris played Jackson Pollock. Those are action paintings stripped. This is Mark Rothko. He's kind of darker, more serious." "Are you paramedics or art experts?" "I was pre-med in art history at Harvard," the paramedic says. "It's nice you're here," Richard says to no one in particular. They lifted him onto the stretcher, and as they lifted him, he cried out. He didn't know why. There were firemen, paramedics, and policemen all around him, carrying him. No one had carried Richard in years. He tried to help them, to make himself light. They wheeled him into the night, the red lights of the trucks ricocheting off the house. He breathed deeply. Oxygen. They drove him down, winding round and round the canyon. The further they went, the riding backwards, the siren's dampened wail, the stop and start of the meat wagon's wobbly waddling conspired to make him disoriented, nauseated, lost. He could almost see it coming. As they backed up to the hospital bay, he closed his eyes, dropped his jaw, and puked. Widescreen, he vomited everywhere, spraying the back of the ambulance with the BB pellets of lentils, spraying the faces of the men as they hurried to free him. They threw a sheet over his face to protect themselves. As the stretcher was pulled out, as the wheels dropped to the ground, he passed out. As fast as he was unconscious, he was conscious again, fully alert, as if launched from a cannon. Had they given him something, a little picker-upper, a shot of the secret sauce? "Mr. Novak, can you hear me?" He was afraid to speak, to open his mouth, but he nodded. "Do you know where you are?" He nodded again. They lifted him off the gurney and onto a bed and wiped his face. "I'm sorry," he said, when it felt safe to talk. "No need to apologize," someone said, which prompted him to repeat, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Take a deep breath. Just keep taking those deep breaths. I need you to relax. You're in good hands, Mr. Novak, very good hands. They were poking him, drawing blood, checking and rechecking his blood pressure, his pupils, looking at the endless EKG. With cheap ballpoint pens, they wrote on his clean white sheet. A young resident stood at his knees, chart in hand. How did it start? He couldn't remember. Couldn't remember when he could remember. He had no sensation of suddenly not remembering, no one thing or another slipping his mind, but more the sensation that there was nothing. He was searching and seeing nothing. No pictures, no memories, no idea where he'd been. "Mr. Novak, do you understand what I'm asking? When did the pain begin?" "I'm not sure," Richard said. "I'm not sure if it just started or if I just noticed it. The more attention I paid, the worse it got. Is Patty here?" "Who's Patty?" "I talked to her earlier, the woman on the phone." "I don't know anyone named Patty," the resident said, annoyed. "My sister's name is Patty," one of the nurses said. "She's very nice," Richard said. "Patty from Minnesota or Mendocino." The resident walked away. "I can offer you this." The nurse handed him a portable phone. "Is there anyone you'd like to call?" He shook his head. Nearby, an attendant was speaking to an attendant was speaking to a man across the way, talking loudly, like making an announcement. "Mr. Rosenberg, you've broken your hip. Your daughter is on her way. Do you know where you are?" "Of course I know where I am. I'm at the movies. This is all a movie," he said. "I wish it was. I'm at the home where I live, or should I say where they put me, waiting to die. Cold storage, that's where I am. I may be old, but I'm not senile." "You're in the hospital, Mr. Rosenberg? You fell? They brought you here? Do you know who the president is, Mr. Rosenberg?" "What does it matter? They're all thieves." "Sometimes people feel better if they talk to someone," the nurse says to Richard. "Are you a pink lady or a nurse?" he asks. "Nurse. I retired 20 years ago, but now I'm back. This is my second act." "What brought you back?" "My husband died, and the truth is I can't bear to be home alone at night. I wasn't sleeping, and so I thought, work nights. It keeps me off the streets and out of the bin." "There's no one you want to call?" the nurse asked again. Who would Richard call? His parents were snowbirds, still somewhere in Florida. His brother in Massachusetts probably wasn't listed. Who would he call? The nutritionist who suggested the lentil soup, which may have been a culprit? His housekeeper, who was the only one who would actually notice when he wasn't home in the morning when she arrived? His trainer was also coming in the morning, and then his masseuse was due, and at some point a decorator was coming to tell him what color the bathroom should be. If he had their numbers, he'd call them all and tell them to forget it, cancel everything. He lay there realizing how thoroughly he'd removed himself from the world of obligations, how stupidly independent he'd become. He needed no one, knew no one, was not part of anyone's life. He'd so thoroughly removed himself from the world that he wasn't sure he still existed. "There has to be someone," the nurse said. "You're nice," he said. "I'm old," she said. A pair of state troopers wheel in a boy tied to a desk chair with yellow nylon rope. "I'm God," the boy announces. "Hi, God, I'm the emergency room nurse. Can you tell us what you took?" "Don't fuck with me," the boy says. "Don't fuck with God." "Okay, God, we'll just give you a little shot to help you." "I'm flying," God shouts, "and I'm free." He starts wiggling inside the ropes. "Free me! I order you to free me!" Who would Richard call if he was never going to call anyone again? Who would he want to speak to just once more? His son, Ben? He couldn't really do that to the kid. They didn't have that kind of relationship. "Oh, hi, Ben. It's your dad calling from the emergency room. Just wanted to check in and see how your life is going. Wanted to wish you BOL, best of luck. Hope you do better than me, kid. Hope you get what you want, what you deserve, and then some. Remember, son, this is it." Who would he call? His ex-wife? She left a message on his machine yesterday. Or maybe it was a few weeks ago. He never called back. He didn't know why. Think about it, the nurse said. And then there's sort of a big skip. Skip. I'm like, skip. Released into the custody of the Beverly Hills Cab Company, Richard stepped into the Los Angeles night. There was an evanescent glow to the sky as light seeped back into the atmosphere, hinting at the day to come. He sat in the back with the windows down, his head into the breeze like a dog. The driver babbled like a bad bartender, talking about everything and nothing. So what was it? Too much to drink, hit by a car, stepped on a nail, kidney stone, pistol whipped? Richard didn't answer. The last thing he wanted was a confessional conversation with the cab driver. Fine, the driver said, keep it a secret. See if I care. Everyone thinks they're entitled to keep it a secret. What do they know? That's how you get really sick. Ulcers, colitis, cancer. I tell people everything. What do I need secrets before? Ask me anything. Richard didn't respond. He didn't ask. They passed a store with an orange neon sign. Donuts. A warm, buttery glow emanated from the window. They passed the store, and when it was gone, Richard wished they had stopped. He couldn't go home. Not yet, not so fast. He needed a minute to clear his thoughts. He leaned forward. I need to go back, he said to the driver. The driver ignored him. I just realized I forgot something. Still no response. Excuse me, he said. I want to go back. To the hospital? No, the donut shop we passed about 10 blocks ago. The man continued to drive. You want me to turn around? Yes, Richard said. So you don't want me to go up Sunset? No, Richard said. I want to go back to that donut shop. Are you just running in or am I dropping you there? I don't know. Why? I'm just wondering if I'm dropping you or waiting. I'm supposed to take you home. That's why they call us, to take people home. Well, I'm hungry and there's no one at home, so unless I'm under arrest or something, I think I'm allowed to go to a donut shop. The driver made a U-turn. You're not like a suicidal diabetic or anything, are you? Richard didn't answer. Okay, so, let me know. Let me know if you're just running in. Do you want something, Richard asked? If I run in, is there something you want? No, I don't think so, the driver said. Maybe a cup of coffee, and if they have something not too sweet, a donut, a couple of donuts, that's all. Or if they have those glazed ones, the high, puffy ones with chocolate on top, I'd take a couple of those. As they pulled up to the donut shop, Richard said, I think I'll just get off here. If you just drop me, that would be great. Does that mean you're not getting me a cup of coffee? No, I'll still get you yours. I'll run in and get you yours, and I'll be right back. Richard got out of the car. Shouldn't you turn the meter off? When you come back, we'll settle up. So basically, I'm paying you for the privilege of buying you a coffee. Look, the driver said, let's not start the day on the wrong foot. And the rest you can read for yourself.
So, well, the main character, as you notice, is called Richard. Are these open?
No. Yes. Now they are. Suddenly.
Yours isn't, mine isn't. Oh, now we do.
I'll share.
Anyway, my question was, could you tell us a few things about Richard?
Such as?
Well,
what kind of a man is he? He's somebody who's made a lot of money. He was sort of in the money business, if that makes any sense. It was something that interested me. How people make money out of money.
So this is in the 90s.
Novelists don't do that. We don't, okay, never mind. Anyway, so he's somebody who made a lot of money in the money business, and he was married and had a child then. And he left the wife and child in New York a long time ago and has gone out to California, and I think hoped to build himself what he thought was a good life. So he bought a lot of art, he bought a nice house, and without realizing it, he just sort of isolated himself more and more. So as part of the markers of his success, he has a nutritionist and a trainer and a masseuse and all these people who come to him, but he forgot, and he hasn't left the house in probably about a month. And then he has this kind of attack.
Yes, and he's extremely lonely, and then because of the crisis, he goes out and he starts to help people, basically.
Yes.
Right? And then the question, so he starts buying presents for people, and he's actually acquiring a reputation for himself for being the Good Samaritan. And then the question that I don't know the answer, maybe you do, is
I'll try.
does he actually get saved? So this is
That's a
the
hard
novel has a
question.
great title, This Book Will Save Your Life. And I read somewhere that it was about Richard's redemption, but personally I wasn't really convinced. So I was wondering, let's ask the author.
Right.
Maybe she
Well, there's
knows.
no money back guarantee, okay? It's not like, this book will save your life, and if it doesn't, you get the money back. No, I think it really is about somebody trying to find their way back into having a life. So it's not a perfect thing. It really is about these odd juxtapositions of people he meets. He meets a crying woman in the produce section and essentially adopts her. And then she wants to know why he doesn't want to have an affair with her, which is just the oddity of life.
Yes.
And he does start sort of doing these kind of slightly larger than life good things, and then he starts to be kind of known as this person who does these good things, and then it also becomes something about how we are, as a culture, sort of consume any information we have about anyone and make it into something else. So it's layered, but is he ultimately saved? I think that he is. It's not a word that we talk about often. He's happier at the end than at the beginning. I think he is still pained, but he now can live with his pain. I think he actually can bear to feel how he feels. And I think often we can't bear to feel how we feel, so we just disconnect from it or, medicate ourselves one way or another, I think.
And are you happy with the word redemption being used for your book?
Big word. I think it's a nice word. I don't know that it's really about redemption so much as transformation, honestly. And one of the big things I wonder about is, can a person change? Can you decide that you want to live your life differently? And especially when you're, 55 years old. Can somebody who, in a funny way, doesn't have to change, it's not like he has to go get a job or do something different because he actually is required to, just in order to sort of support himself. It's a real decision that he makes, that he wants to be a different kind of person. And that interests me. We have, on the one hand, Oprah talking often about things like that, but I was sort of more interested in a more philosophical, and on the one hand, it's so funny to say, as weird and surreal and not real as this is, but a more realistic approach to somebody thinking, this is not how I want to be known. This is not how I want to be known in my own life, and certainly not in my larger life. Remember the story of Alfred Nobel, the guy who founded the Nobel Prize? He also was the man who discovered dynamite. And something happened, and one of those weird things where inadvertently, before he was dead, his obituary was published, and he had the occasion to read it. We hate that when that happens, but he read his obituary and it said, Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, has died. And he thought, I don't really want that to be my obituary. I don't want to be known as the inventor of dynamite. And he really wanted there to be something more to it. So he founded the Nobel Prize. I aspire to doing something like that.
So you wrote this book.
A.M. Holmes Prize for something.
But
it sounds better, Nobel. It sounds, I should have gotten a different name, right? The Holmes Prize for housewares. I don't know.
But in a sense, your book is sort of part of that American tradition of self-help and self-improvement.
Yeah, and it's also, I look at things like, Crime and Punishment. Not really the American tradition of self-help.
No, not at all.
But I think it's also a novel about, where you're reading, this book is not as good as Crime and Punishment, and I can guarantee you of that. But I think it's a book where somebody is struggling with who they are and what the cause and effect of their actions are and how they live their life. I think,
And to what extent is it also about, you said yourself, it is also about LA, because reading it as a European, a Western European, I find all these people extremely odd. And
they're my best friends.
And I was glad people were actually giggling and laughing, because I felt the whole book was hilarious often. But I wasn't quite certain whether it was meant to be hilarious. I mean, I felt that the way these people behave is really, really odd. But then I thought, well, maybe that's how things are in LA, you know? Maybe there's nothing odd about it. Like, there's that one scene when he's sort of very sad, and then his trainer says, or his masseuse or whatever says, shall I give you a hug? And I thought, what a madhouse, that even when you need a hug, you can call, like you ask for a pizza to be delivered, you can have a hug delivered. Yeah, okay.
I think that on the one hand, it is a work of fiction. It is reality pushed ever so slightly to its edges. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you can't make this stuff up. No. I mean, the things in this book that are the things that you would think are the weirdest, like a pack of feral chihuahuas roaming the streets of Los Angeles, are entirely real. It's only the things that you think, you know, just seem sort of mundane that probably are the things I made up. Yes, there are crying people in the grocery stores of Los Angeles, but I think they are, on the one hand, odd. On the other hand, they're not. They are, you know, sort of deeply human, and I really would venture to say that all these people do exist. On the other hand, I also could say that I really made them all up. And both are really true. I mean, I mean that entirely genuinely. I think it's one of the sort of smarter reviews in the U.S. talked about it along the lines of Kurt Vonnegut's work. And I think one of the things that I always liked about Vonnegut was how Vonnegut was able to be both satirical and absurdist and entirely earnest all at once.
Oh, yeah. And do you want to expose that society? Do you want to show a certain... Do you want to show that society and the way people in LA live is actually absurd?
Yes.
Yes. So you too feel it's just fairly weird.
I don't live there. I couldn't live there.
Yes.
I mean,
have you done some research?
I've done a lot of research. I go there. I can't, you know, I am a city person, and I need to see, it's funny, I need to see other people, and you don't see other people in Los Angeles. You just see them drive by. Hi. You know, it's just very odd, and it is an interesting city, and a city that has sort of increasingly an enormous both ethnic and economic and cultural diversity, but it's as though you have to like lift up the carpet and look underneath, because you will not find it when you first arrive there. Everything is just as smooth as this table and invisible. And I find it genuinely interesting. I also find the oddity of people like the people who want to give you a hug.
Yeah.
You know, they're there. I mean, they're in America, and I think one of the contrasts in this book is On Hill, the donut seller who becomes a very pivotal figure. On Hill has come to America, and in many ways he has a purer hope for what he wants America to be than someone like Richard, who, on the one hand, has worked and sort of made his way and has everything. And Richard does not have a very optimistic view at all, I think, of our abilities to sort of, you know, connect and care for each other.
I thought this was very interesting, where you lifted the carpet, because that's when I was reading your novel and also your other work, I was reminded of Blue Velvet and American Beauty, this sort of idea of there being two Americas, the America on the surface, which is very proper and appropriate, and then the very destructive.
Well, you know, I think something that I've always written about, really from the very beginning, is the difference between our public and private selves. And I don't know if this is true in sort of other countries and other cultures, but in America there absolutely is a sense that there is the person that you present to the rest of the world, and then there is the person who's somehow less than acceptable, who is who you are at home. And that people are constantly struggling to sort of reconcile the two. Then we have these funny things that happen now in America. Casual Fridays, which means that people go to work, I don't know, dressed in their pajamas or something. It's like you go sort of dressed in your regular clothes. So it's like one of those days where your private self sort of sneaks out a little bit and you wear the crazy colored socks that you don't wear on another day. It's just a funny thing where I think there's something very sort of in a way, rigid about the societal structure that says we don't tolerate the individual. As much as America's all about the individual, it says we want you to be as bland as this piece of paper and to just come into the office and look like this. And if you actually come in looking like this, that would scare people because it would have too much information.
And so why do people yearn for the blandness? Is it because of the
I
equality?
don't. This actually scares me, you know.
Everybody has to be equal, so bland.
It's also that everybody has to be kind of not challenging, that no one wants to have to think or deal with somebody else's life, really, or somebody else's needs or somebody else's problems. I think people are, I would say in America, honestly, people are terrified by emotion. They don't want to, I mean, it's, you know, we're a very heavily medicated culture now. We don't want to have any emotions. We don't want to feel too good or too bad. We just want to feel like this. It's awful. It's weird.
And then you go home and this comes out.
Yeah, can you imagine what that's like?
But this, in your work, is extremely violent and destructive at times. I mean, there is, for instance, I mean, you
Not
wrote
your
it, I'm just
opinion.
quoting. No, but for instance, that relationship between Richard and his son, where at one point the son suggests that he fucks his father or father fucks him.
Yeah.
I can't remember which was.
It doesn't really matter which. It's sort of the basic concept is still the
Which
same.
personally I find pretty extreme, don't you?
It is
I mean,
extreme, but it's also
right.
meant. I mean, it's you're taking it out of context. You know, it's a moment that really is about this son who has, for years, wanted something from his father and wanted his father to really be a father to him. And he's gay, and he's, you know, part of what he says is part of why he's gay is because he wants to have some sort of an intimate relationship with a man, but he, you know, does this sort of very kind of threatening, bizarre thing to his father because he doesn't know how else to relate to him. And I think it's kind of like heartbreaking and pathetic more than disturbing. No, it is disturbing. It's many, you know, it's not.
No, but also, I mean, in many of the short stories, what people do at home is extremely weird and interesting and fascinating, but it is weird, isn't it?
I don't know. Okay. Surveys tell us that Americans do weird things at home.
But you can't account for this sort of these double standards and.
I think it's funny because I think on the one hand, everyone's always telling me your stories are so weird, yet you seem awfully normal. And I go on book tour, and then on the one hand, you know, I honestly think everybody must be a little bit weird. I mean, you know, let's just be truthful here for a second. Are you people weird? You know, what do you do at home? What is the difference between who you are when you go out in the world and you go to your job versus sort of all the things that you really think but never say? I think my habit as a writer is to sort of, I write the things that people won't say. I write the things that people are afraid to talk about, and then I give them back to you. And you can read them privately at home and go, she's so weird. You know.
Now, what I find very interesting is that I think everybody will agree that your work is
weird,
inappropriate. The way your characters behave is totally inappropriate, and the Americans seem obsessed with appropriate behavior.
Yeah.
I remember Clinton saying
Well,
nothing
good example,
inappropriate
right?
and everything.
Yeah.
So how come you're so popular?
Oh, I'm not really. I'm weird. No, I think, you know, I'm not, I wish I was so popular is all I can say. I mean, I think that I definitely believe that we all have a lot more going on under the surface than we either readily admit or talk about. And I really do believe that it's important to talk about things and to sort of, if you're not going to admit them to the whole world, you at least have to admit who you are to yourself, and that sort of honesty with oneself. I mean, I think Richard actually sort of becomes a much more interesting person when he knows himself more, when he feels awful, and he sort of just lives with how he feels.
Okay, you're sort of saying that we should talk about things, so let's talk about sex.
Okay. A lot of people.
I mean, there's a lot of violence in sex in your work. Violence in sex in your work, sort of.
Apparently, yeah.
Yes. Come on, Miss.
Yeah, I know. It's not like I haven't heard it before. Yes, there is.
And?
Well, I don't know. You know, it's funny. I don't know what the end is. I mean, I remember with the novel Music for Torching, which was the last novel before this. I was on book tour in the U.S., and the couple is a couple that's having a very hard time, a man and a woman who are married and have 2 children, and they ultimately kind of burn their house down very early on in the book because they don't know what else to do.
Perfectly normal behavior.
Perfectly normal behavior. Yes. They're the same people who in one of the stories smoked crack early on, probably 10 years before that, because they also don't know what to do. I think of them as very classic Americans. I think that in a funny way, the typical American adult right now is not a very mature person. They're not a very sophisticated person. And they do weird things.
I mean, you've toured Europe. Do you think we're heading that way?
No.
Why not?
I think, honestly, one of the weirdest... I have one word in my vocabulary. Weird, wow.
Most interesting, say. One of the most interesting.
One of the most interesting aspects of European cultures is that European cultures actually admit that they have a history. And European cultures don't tear down their buildings, and they live in the places where they've been for hundreds and hundreds of years. Americans have Alzheimer's right now. They're like, we are a new country, we don't remember what we did last week. We indicted you, then we re-elected you, and we are so happy to see you again today. And what is your name again? I mean, we are really weird. I mean, there's something going on there right now. In all honesty, look at what's going on in our government. Look at who we have become in the last 20 years. It used to be when you came to Europe and you were an American, it was a cool thing. Oh, the Americans are here. Jerry Lewis, the Cowboys, the Indians, all these different things. Now it's like the Americans are here. Like the hillbillies who are just stupid. The people who have absolutely no judgment about anything.
Yes, but this is our perception. That may not be.
It's not just your perception. That's the problem.
So what went wrong and when?
I think that... Well, I can't pinpoint the date exactly. It was right in there with the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing. It got a little, I think what really has happened in part is that...
That you elected Bush?
Well, I didn't, okay. Not me personally. And in fact, he wasn't actually really elected. He just decided he would assume the presidency, okay? That's the first thing. He got his family in Florida to help him assume the presidency of the country. And somehow no one said, No one said you actually didn't win. Could you please move over? Instead, they all went like, oh, okay. The bully wins. We're weird. We are weird. There's something wrong with us. I don't know what.
Okay. But you see, the way...
I say this. I'm going to go home and they're going to be like, at the airport, frisk her 3 times.
But
not supposed to say these things. There I go again.
But as I saw it in your novel, there is Anhill, the Indian. Yeah. And as I read it, there is a lot of warmth. He has a family, and they all love one another, and they care. And on the other hand, there are the Americans, and they're lonely and alienated. And I thought maybe the Europeans are somewhere in between,
Well, they probably are somewhere in between.
And we are heading. So would you sort of say that by acquiring wealth and having all become consumers, that we have lost the ability to enjoy and
not everybody. I mean, I think that American culture right now and American success is more than in other places. It is defined by money, and it is defined by the stuff that you have and how big your house is. And it's just kind of a non-culture right now. I mean, it's not there's not a lot of interesting sort of development of even, if you look at things like, to be honest, if you look at literature and dance and art in America, it's kind of not at its most exciting point. I mean, it's also cyclical, and it will come back around again, but...
Are you saying it's all a bit bland, except in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, honestly, is I think that we really are in a period where we are not interested in our history, and I think if you're not aware of your history and not thinking about your future, you'd be hard-pressed to produce anything of substance. Because how do you work in a vacuum? How do you work not knowing anything and not thinking anything? Well, and honestly, look at our companies. Enron, oops. We have huge things. We pay people millions and millions of dollars to ruin American companies, and then we give them these benefit packages. Thank you for ruining our company, and now would you just take an extra $50 million and go home? We are just odd right now.
So is there any hope? Is there any hope?
Yes, elect me. No, I'm just kidding. I think the interesting thing is, and why this novel, and everyone keeps giving me a hard time saying, your novel is so different from your previous work, it's hopeful. I think I wanted there to be hope. I was desperate for hope. I tried to give some hope. I think there is hope. I think that it really is about taking responsibility and sort of thinking, I mean, the other really peculiar thing, and this is, sort of semi-serious note, or it is very serious, which is this book was written pretty much after 9/11, and I was in New York looking out my window and saw what happened. I was witness to it. And I think in many ways, the people who saw what happened, not only were we terrorized, it also reminds you that this is it. This is the only life you're getting, and if you want to make it work, you have to do something. And you have to try to be sort of a positive force in your own life and a positive force in the lives of people around you. And I think it's interesting because New Yorkers, everyone around the world always thinks New Yorkers are tough, hardened people. And it's actually, I think, one of the friendliest cities in the world because everything in New York is a shared communal experience. Every moment that you have, 10 other people are having the same moment. And they're all happy to look at you and go like, oh, I saw that too. Did you see what, it is a sort of a very rich community. And that's one of the things that I like about it. But I don't think America is typical. I don't think New York is typical of the rest of America in many ways.
And you're saying that having seen the plane
Yeah.
fly into the tower, the second plane, that it has had an impact on you. But how do you see the impact on the States? Or has it changed your feeling of being an American, what it means to be an American?
I think it's changed my feeling of the urgency with which I live my life, the awareness that what I saw was something, and I pride myself on being this person with, an enormous imagination. And I saw something with my physical eye that I could never see in my mind's eye. And all of a sudden, the world that had been, for me, a stable place, and then a place that kind of always held me while I went, departed into my imagination, became so unstable that it wasn't safe to even go into my imagination because I had to actually worry about my physical existence. And deal with what was going on. And I think that changed my ability to sort of go as far into my head as I want to go because I always feel like I have to be looking out a little bit, and also my ability to trust my surroundings. I think, it's funny now too because I think a lot of people in America are much more suspicious of our government and much less trusting of our government. And yet our government simultaneously is basically telling us we are not the government of the people, by the people. We are the government that we want to be privately, and we are not going to tell you what we're doing, which is really weird. We're all kind of like, are you sure that's okay? It's just that we're in a very weird moment where I think, in the name of national security, we are becoming increasingly sneaky and private and watching ourselves in ways that, make us all really ultimately kind of uncomfortable.
And do you think that development may be stopped, like for instance, if a Democrat gets elected next time?
I think in a funny way, this is as dark as it's gotten in America probably since the 1950s in terms of everybody feeling like they are kind of being observed, but for reasons that we don't know why. And I think it can change, but I also think it's just, we had kind of gotten ourselves economically to a kind of a good place, and now we're wildly in debt again. We're in this war that you mentioned. I wasn't going to bring it up. That we don't really know why we're there, and yet every time we sort of think like, oh, it's sort of fizzling out. Maybe they'll just sneak out of it. They go, let's commit more people, which basically, it's like, let's just provoke more.
But how do you experience it living in the United States? You're sort of saying we're living in a very dark period. What is the concrete experience?
Yeah, I think one of the weirdest things is for most people, the concrete experience is, and I mean this 100% honestly, it's nothing. For the average American, there is no experience of it because the average American is not in the army. The average American, one of the things they have is they have less health care and they have less access to health care. But by and large, if a lot of people living on credit, a lot of people sort of working a lot of jobs, and an economy that sort of on the surface looks okay but isn't really. So by and large, the average person it's not touched by it, which is part of the problem, sort of, because it is real and it's happening, but the people who believe that our government is changing and is becoming kind of, slightly more menacing towards its own citizens are not the people who are living in the middle. I mean, there's just a kind of a gap. It's hard to describe. I mean, I really would say we are in a really, like in 10 years when we look back on this period in American history, it will be fascinating to try to write about because there's so much going on now that we don't know and understand, and we don't know why it's happening, and yet nobody seems to really sort of say, this is getting too weird. I think it will fade out at the end of this administration to some degree, but it will take a lot to kind of undo the damage. And I also think, it's funny to say, like, I as a person, I like my country, I like where I live, I care a lot about it, but I really worry about how we look to the rest of the world. Because I think we look like, adolescent bullies, really. And we look like people are just saying, like, I want all the toys now. And then we're nutty right now.
So you have this awareness of how the rest of the world looks at you. Okay.
Yeah, I think that people, again, and this is, my weird experience, is always that people were very interested in America, and America was kind of an interesting, hopeful concept, that people really came from all over the world and immigrated there, and it became this kind of a rich culture very quickly, and it was really a place that people were interested in, and people consumed American culture and American music and film and all that stuff. And I think right now, we don't look so good. We really don't. I don't think, I'd be curious what other people think. I think we're not exactly, we're not friendly. We're kind of, it's just odd. And the way that America relates to other countries now is kind of hostile and sort of like, what do you want? And then they're like, okay, we'll give you a lot of money, because we seem to have excess money to give to other countries, just not to the American people.
But you actually write somewhere that when you are in Europe, you hide your American
I do,
nationality.
which I never used to, but I feel like I'm embarrassed to be an American in some way, and yet that's hard to say, because I would equally say, it's funny, I really am American. I really have the flaws of someone who is very American and all that.
But interestingly, so you witnessed 9/11. Now you would say there had to be some kind of response. If you had been in charge, how would you have responded? You could sort of say the administration had to do something. They couldn't just say, oh, well, let's have a good talk with
I honestly
Osama.
think it's probably so much more complicated than most of us know, that I wouldn't even know how to begin to answer that. I don't think I would have decided we must go to war. I think that I'm a girl, we don't do that, it's like, all right, let's just talk some more,
Would it have been crazy to actually sit down and talk? I sort of wondered if just imagine that they had invited Al-Qaeda and said, come on guys, what's your problem?
They could have said, clearly you guys are looking for attention. Now you have our attention. It's like, I don't know, maybe they should do psychotherapy instead of foreign policy. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I just know that the idea that to respond to violence with violence only just begets more violence. And it's funny, you talk about how violent I am, but by nature I'm not. Or I'm more interested, I don't know.
You're the messenger.
I don't know. I just think I'm not. I'm not just a messenger. I don't know. I'm a reporter. I'm somebody who looks at American culture and looks at culture in different cities in America and different ways that we live, and sort of reports it back to people. I have to say, one of the things not to sort of change the subject, but it has always been enormously meaningful to me to see my work translated in other languages, because I think the fact that my work would have meaning to somebody in Germany, in Romania, in Greece, to me, I think that's the coolest thing. And I think, wow, I thought it was just American.
Do you actually notice a difference in people's response in Greece, in all these countries, and in the United States? Do people
Sometimes everyone doesn't always get all the jokes, because there are jokes that are just not translatable. No, I think what's interesting is honestly that in Europe, when you go on book tour, the questions that people ask are much more serious. They actually, in the United States, on a book tour and on interviews, no one would ever ask you anything about political life in America or anywhere. They would never ask you what you think about something, because it's just funny. They don't want to have that kind of serious conversation. They will ask you things, I'm not kidding, about your shoes.
About your shoes?
About your shoes, about your hair. It's like they will do everything to not make it be about the book, because they don't really want to talk about the book. The book is sort of like, okay, we know you wrote a book, but now let's talk about, do Do you have any like makeup tips that you would want to pass along? Literally, and you're thinking,
Are you serious?
I'm totally serious. I'm absolutely serious. When magazines call you and say, we really want to do something about your book, but you kind of like, is there a favorite piece of clothing that you write in? And you're thinking.
So this is again part of the blandness.
Yeah.
Non-confrontational.
It's so weird. And I literally at this one I said, yes, I write in a Chanel suit. That I leave the house in my regular clothes and I go and I put a Chanel suit on because it allows me to think things I wouldn't otherwise think. And then when I go out for lunch with my friends, I change back into my gym clothes. And they called me up and said, hey, that's great. And they said, okay, the photo shoot is next week. And I said, super, what should I wear? And they said, well, wear your Chanel suit. And they had to borrow one from like Chanel, from Chanel samples. And I would like to say Chanel samples, they only have samples in size 2. So I literally couldn't even get my arm. I'm like trying to put my arm just in the armhole. And finally they're like, could you just drape it over your shoulder? I mean, I couldn't, I got my arm like this far. It was like, because it was made for, I don't know, exclusively for Anna Wintour or something. I don't know. And then there was actually Laurie Moore. They asked her what she wrote in, and she said she wrote in Post-its. And then they're like, how do you photograph, it's covered with Post-its? I don't know. But that's the kind of questions I ask writers. What do you wear to write in?
Okay, well...
yeah, so I appreciate the actual questions.
One of the striking things is that the relationship between parents and children is always extremely complicated. And I have the feeling that the parents simply refuse to see what their children are up to. They just want to keep that illusion intact. We are the happy family. Is that
I think it's partially that. I also think when I look at, a book like Music for Torching, which ends with a sort of a shooting at a school that came out right before the whole Columbine thing, I think also what happens is that often parents are so involved in sort of their own lives and meeting their own needs that they're not actually paying attention to their children. They're not looking and they're not seeing and they're not listening because they're so busy kind of trying to get what they want for themselves. But I am very interested in sort of the dynamics between couples and parents and children, and
Yeah. And as I was mentioning, I have this feeling that you are a very, very private person.
Yes, I am.
Shall I mention
what?
The mistress's daughter?
Well, you can, because soon enough everyone's going to be mentioning it anyway. Sure.
Go ahead. You tell it.
Once upon a time. It's an awful. Well, see, you could probably tell it better than I can, which is part of why I don't like talking about it. I'm adopted. So I haven't figured out yet how you say that. I am adopted. I was adopted. I'm up for adoption again soon, and I'm considering. Families all over the world should feel free to submit applications, photos. What they might offer to me. Chanel suits exactly, in the proper size. I'm adopted, and I knew that. I always knew that from day one. I arrived at my parents' house, and they said, "You're adopted, and welcome home." And then when I was 32, my biological family came back and found me. And it was right when a book I had written was coming out and had gotten a lot of attention, and I couldn't really figure out if they knew who I was, if they didn't know who I was, and sort of what they wanted. And so I wrote this piece about that and about sort of who they turned out to be, and they were kind of awful, and my mother stalked me. And say things like, "Do I have to come to Columbia University and find you?" And I think, "Please don't." It was just very, very intense and odd, because I actually, before that, thought my parents were Susan Sontag and Jack Kerouac. I had this whole vision, like a one-night thing. They really didn't get along, but then of course they gave me up, because which of them would keep me, right? So it was just odd and awful. And it's the one, I wrote this book now about it, and
A whole book.
And I have to say, I don't like writing autobiographically. I find it truly excruciating, and I will never do it again.
So why did you do it?
I don't know. I think when it was happening, I very much, well, first I thought, I'll never forget this, because it's too weird, right? Because you can't, who comes back and these strange people, we're your parents, and I'm like, prove it, No, you're not. You couldn't possibly
There
be.
was actually a test, wasn't there?
Yeah, so my biological father, I love this part, See, having never seen anyone who looked like me, I have this funny problem where I won't recognize anyone who looked like me either because I don't know what I am. But oddly, my father looks exactly like me, and people who've seen photographs go, oh yeah, you look exactly like. But his wife decided that there should be a DNA test, supposedly.
Second. Oh yeah, wife. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's only
Yeah,
the same wife he had
it's
when
true,
he was
yeah, because the
dating my mother.
mistress is-
Right, exactly.
Yes, okay.
So there should be a DNA test to somehow prove that I really was his child. So part of me thought, sure, because who are you people? You know, and I'm not so sure who you are. And so I did this DNA test with him, and it ultimately said I was his child. And the first thing he said was, so what are my responsibilities? And I just thought, like, number one, don't be a jerk. Number two, you know. And then later, actually, which is in the book that you haven't read this part yet, I later then asked him for a copy of the DNA test, and he refused to give it to me. So the big thing now is whether or not I'm going to have to sue him to prove paternity, which I love, the idea that you have to sue your father who made you have a DNA test. And then he's like claiming that he lost the results, which I think if you go to all the trouble to have someone have a DNA test, you don't lose the results. And then he said later that he gave them to his lawyer, and the lawyer said he lost the results. And I think, how many lawyers do you keep who keep losing your, you know, whatever. So it's this whole sort of story. And then the weird part of it too was doing this, then I started doing sort of genealogical research. And, you know, online now you can do all these things that you could never do before. And so I found somebody who had my family tree going back to 1564. So I have this one piece that goes all the way back, and then I was sort of digging around for the rest. I would find things like, I would find someone who had been a butcher on 2nd Avenue in New York City who'd come from Germany, and then I would find another person with the same name and same birthday who died at Auschwitz. And like in that kind of Siebold-y way, you're thinking, well, who am I related to? And then you think, what does it matter? They're all the same. And that you're sort of on the one hand related to everybody and related to no one, but if you don't know who you are, it's all too weird. And so it really was about identity and how, and this to me was all, the super weird part is here I am, a fiction writer who makes up stories. And it's so much about whatever story you're told, that we just sort of, your family says you are from here and your grandmother did this and this is where your parents met, and you just kind of go. And then later you say to your children, we are from here and this is where your great-grandparents met. And, you know, it's not like anyone says, I'm not sure that makes sense, or, you know, whatever.
But do you find that it actually matters to know where you're from?
I find it interesting. And I would say, you know, it's a question of, like, what is matters? Do you know what I mean? Because what matters? I think there are genealogical and biological threads that run through all of us that I would say, I found things that I thought later, I thought, that makes sense to me. Like, it felt, for lack of a better word, biologically resonant, or like on a cellular level, I thought, that works. You know, that's a fit. It's just odd. It's just all very odd.
To know. You say you are a writer of fiction. Of course you are a writer of fiction, and yet now you have written a memoir.
Yes.
The truth, the real stuff.
Yes. And I can assure you actually that the memoir is entirely true, unlike many other memoirs written these days.
And what I have read is extremely well written. Only I wondered, aren't you worried in case people are going to say, that's where it comes from? Because like there is a scene in this book, Will Save Your Life, where when I then read The Mistress's Daughter, I thought,
What scene?
I'll tell you later, it's private. But,
you know what I honestly think about that is I think on the one hand, somebody said to me a long time ago, like, never write autobiographically because you sort of, you don't... Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's a scene that turns up in this book,
yes.
Will Save
You
Your
know what I
Life.
was trying to say what is exactly that. What is interesting is I think for all writers, there are images and language that we use that repeat themselves from book to book. And absolutely what you're seeing there is a thread of something. You see where a piece of something that comes out of my life, it's still a secret, we can't tell you. But, you know, yeah, but that is a real thing. I mean, there's lots of real threads in the fiction that are, you know, bits and pieces. But
aren't you worried in case that might diminish the fiction? I'm not saying that it does.
Wasn't until you said that. I mean,
because like I was thinking, somebody earlier on mentioned Amos Oz, remember? And he's recently published his autobiography.
Yeah.
And then when I read it, before I had read Black Box, and you could see Black Box is the fictional version of what actually happened. And it's as if, in the case of Oz, it's as if he sort of didn't have the guts, or the climate was different, or whatever.
Right.
So, and
You know, I'm honestly, I mean, now you're making me nervous, but I wasn't really worried about it before. And I think, you know, the one novel in A Country of Mothers that is somewhat about adoption is actually, I think, to my mind, my least successful book. I don't like that book. I never liked it the whole time I was writing it. And I felt like part of it was I didn't get it right. And for me, I think it may have been because it was some ways close to me and close to my experience. And I have to say, I'm not, you know, the whole thing about being adopted absolutely has affected who I am, and I am always going to be an outsider. And who knows if I hadn't, I mean, frankly, I think I wouldn't have survived if I hadn't been adopted, because these people were weird. I mean, you think the people in the stories are weird? You should see my actual parents. But anyway, I mean, I think, you know, I'm not going to write fiction about this. I'm not worried about it. I sort of want to say, like, my hopes and dreams for myself are so much larger than, you know, any one piece of memoir that really is about a very distinct period in my life. And also, interestingly, I think, is not really about me. It's about these people. It's about, you know, who they were and how they behaved. And not as much about, you know, me, I guess. Although maybe it really is about me and I just haven't noticed. I'm a private person and I wouldn't want to know that about myself.
okay, well, I think it's, maybe it's time for questions.
Step right up. Exactly.
That you may want to ask. Is there a microphone?
You know, if you guys don't ask questions, I will start asking you questions.
So if anybody would like everything you've always wanted, so there's a microphone if you like. I know, you can just, okay.
Is there something peculiar that I have with swimming pools? No. I like them. The swimming pool in here is, I mean, outside of the hotel where I stay in Los Angeles, there is a swimming pool that in my mind's eye is that swimming pool. Are you thinking of something else besides this book? Yeah. The Raft and Water story? Yeah. There's a story in the book, Things You Should Know, called Raft and Water Floating, that was actually written for an artist catalog, and it was kind of based on a photograph that someone gave me of a young girl floating on a raft in a pool. And then there's a companion story to it, actually, called The Weather Outside is Sunny and Bright, that I wrote for the artist Rachel Whiteread, which is about a shapeshifter that first appears in that other story. I would say it's interesting that you're asking about that, in the sense that I still feel like I'm not done with California. And I very much want to, as I put it, I want to write a Margaret Atwood novel, whatever that is, set in California about a shapeshifter. No.
It might have. Maybe you have suppressed it.
Maybe.
Yes, we'll
I
analyze.
might have to go to a special therapy for recovering my early
swimming pool
memories.
therapy.
I did swim. I liked swimming.
Anything else? Yes?
He was born that way. The question was why Richard is a man. You know, it's well, because he is one. I think maybe the question you're asking is why it's written from a male point of view. And I would say I've written from all different points of view, and I honestly almost would say I enjoy and feel like I do a better job writing from a male point of view. And it may be because I'm not male, and I'm not sensitive. I love men. I love, you know, inhabiting somebody other than myself and thinking about how people think. And it is a voice and a difference in thinking that I really appreciate. I have a harder time writing female characters, honestly. I just find myself thinking like, oh, her again. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's maybe because it's, you know, it's a little close to me or something. I don't know. I like the time travel, and I like the whole thing of being another person.
Anybody else? It's like an auction. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Honestly, in the United States, you get no questions about anything outside of your shoes in the book. You know, it's just not, no one asks you. I mean, it's definitely a much more European phenomenon. In fact, when they give American writers training about going to Europe, there's a special school, But one of the things your publisher always says is be prepared that they will actually ask you questions about things and ask for your opinion on things. And it is something no one ever asks your opinion in the United States about anything of substance, which is interesting because you would think, they might think you'd have something to say. No, we don't even actually use the word intellectual anymore in the United States. They just dropped it right out of the dictionary. It's part of what I'm getting at.
But if you were invited...
Ineffectual, we changed it. It's a new word. Yeah. No, it's just so interesting. No one asks you questions like that. They'll ask you, they don't even know how to ask you a question about, what are your thoughts about the world around you? It's really kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not joking either. It's just not part of what's talked about. It's almost not considered polite conversation, and everyone, if it came up, would just get very nervous at this point, and they would change the subject for fear of offending somebody. I just think, I'm an equal opportunity offender. I offend everybody all the time.
But like even at Harvard, say you'd be invited at Harvard, there wouldn't be any sort of questioning of...
No, I was just there actually last week. No one asked me anything. In fact, somebody came up to me, I got this thing of, I was in your class once, remember me? And you are? No, I mean, they don't ask you anything. They really don't.
So there's a fear of giving offense, of not being politically correct.
I think that, there obviously somewhere in America, in 2 cafes, there are political conversations going on. And in taxis, there are political conversations going on sometimes. And on the internet. Yeah, and on the internet. Exactly. And on some call-in, and on some call-in radio shows, there are people who will very anonymously call in and sort of voice their opinions. It's not, people aren't talking about stuff. It's just, you all better come over and just look at it, and tell me what you think, because I think it's weird. I'm serious. It was very odd. And I also think it's like, in the 1940s and 50s, did people not talk about what was going on in our society? Maybe we never talked about it. I'm not that old, but my sense is when I was growing up, and I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the 60s, there was a lot of noise, and there was a lot of talking about our relationship to our government, our relationship to the Vietnam War, our relationship to a lot of things. And there was a lot of activity about it. And there hasn't been that in a very long time. And it's a very different place, and I'm not sure why that is. If people just feel that they can't be effective, or if people, I would honestly say, this is also going to sound weird, I shouldn't say this either, what's wrong with me tonight? It's the not sleeping. This is how they get you. They don't let you sleep, and then they ask you tricky questions. I've heard about that. No.
Well, maybe one more question.
Well, the one thing that is interesting, in America, in all honesty, I don't sign petitions. There'll be things that I am definitely opposed to or not opposed to, and sometimes on the street corners people say like, oh, will you sign this petition for this, that, or the other thing? And I honestly, having grown up in a household and being aware of people who, if they sign petitions or in any way oppose the government, who got audited years and years in a row, and I'm really, it sounds so funny because of all I've said tonight, I'm really very careful. I just think I don't want to interact with my government in that way. I'd rather actually try to sort of, talk about things in a certain sense and write books, but I'm not going to sign petitions. They then they also do these things now where they turn the petition into something else, and it looks as though you signed something else. It's all weird.
One final question.
From all 10 of you. Decide amongst yourselves what that last question is.
Okay, go ahead. Whoever else. Okay.
Right. It's no struggle at all for me. I'm just one of those right now. I just wake up. Because I had that Robin Williams problem where I could just kind of, digress. For me, a book really starts with what I always think of as like a nonfiction idea. I really will think about, I'm interested in transformation. I'm interested in California. I'm interested in the effect of money on somebody. I'm interested in an immigrant's experience, very kind of like conceptual ideas. And I think about those for quite a long time, and I start making notes, and then at a certain point, a character begins to define itself. And I would say once that character sort of is fully formed to me, then almost what I would describe in a kind of almost a musical way, the pitch or the angle of attack of the book, which is really sort of like the musical beginning of it, becomes clear, and then I can begin. And from that point, it takes me 10 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. It takes me probably 4 years. I write, I rewrite, I print out, I edit. I'm very I don't know. I've gotten very, I love editing. I just love, even as I read things, I'm crossing stuff out. This book was 7,000 pages when I started. It takes me a long time.
Okay, well, I must say I immensely enjoyed listening to you, and I hope you have some energy left to sign some books which are on sale, I believe. We're going to be hearing. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you also that you were willing to tell something about your private life, because that was really revealing, and probably that's why you can write also those weird stories we really enjoy. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Hammerrex, also for the interview. Really very interesting. I also would like to thank the musician, Jamie McLaren, who played earlier this evening. I would like to thank the Bezige Bij publishers. I would also like to thank Felix Meritis. And of course I would like to thank all our volunteers this evening. For now I would like to mention also the upcoming lectures. Next week on Thursday, May 30, we will have Mark Kurlansky, who will discuss his book The Big Oyster. It's a historical look at New York, and he will be moderated by Russell Shorto, who wrote the book New Amsterdam, about the Dutch roots of the New Yorkers. Then we will have Madeleine Albright the 17th of June in Amsterdam, and John Irving in The Hague on the 24th of June. I hope you will be able to join us. For more information about our lectures or becoming a member, have a look at our website at www.john-adams.nl. Or you can have a look at our information stand. We would be really delighted to welcome you as a member, and I would like to mention here Mrs. Carine Meijer, who showed her support this year by joining the President's Club, but also that's why I'm mentioning her here, because she sent 80 emails to all of her friends, and really that's very important for the Institute, so I would really welcome people to do that as well, because word of mouth is the best publicity we can have. So thank you very much, Corinne, for doing that. Mrs. Holmes will sign her books downstairs, and you can also buy a copy of her book. Well, you're all welcome to have a drink downstairs in the bar, and I hope to see you again at one of our upcoming lectures. Thank you.
Thank you.